Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric, and the roller coasters of Cedar Point are beloved by many coaster enthusiasts around the world. However, some people believe that they get too much praise or too little praise for what they are. And today I'm going to be talking about which roller coasters at Cedar Point are overrated, and which ones are underrated. Before we get into the primary topic of the video, please subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot, and we've been growing quite a bit, and you will get to know right when new coaster content comes out. Now, a few ground rules here. First of all, I will be going through alphabetical order all of the roller coasters with the exception of the two kiddie coasters, and Wicked Twister because it is closed, and I will deem them either overrated, underrated, or middle. Underrated can be one of two things: a coaster that everyone hates that I like, or everyone likes that I love. For overrated, it can either be something everyone praises to the moon and back, and I think is just very good but not quite up there, or a ride I don't like that other people seem to overall enjoy. With that out of the way, let's get right into Blue Streak, the first roller coaster on here. This one is interesting. You don't hear a whole lot of people talking about this one because it's much smaller in the lineup. And overall, in terms of what I think of the ride on its own without other opinions, it is good. It does get a little jolty and bumpy, and that honestly makes it one of the scariest rides in the park for me. But the airtime is really good, and the pacing is pretty strong through most of the ride, and it has quite a charm to it. I enjoy the ride overall. It's very good, not necessarily a great wooden coaster, but a strong ride. And all in all, I think other people seem to say that it is good, and I hear some do not like it, think it's a rough ride overall. I don't know a ton who love this ride, so overall, I will deem Blue Streak underrated. Now for Cedar Creek Mine Ride. Cedar Creek Mine Ride is a good mine train in my opinion, and around the coaster community I hear some people say it's kind of rough and not very fun. I don't think it's very rough. You might get thrown around a little bit, but I think it's one of the stronger mine trains. And all in all, it's just a really solid ride. So while this one's a bit close because it's one of the more minor rides at the park, I will be calling this one underrated. Next up is Corkscrew. Corkscrew, I just don't think it's as bad as people say. Often deemed one of the worst roller coasters, I can absolutely get behind that. But man, my last ride just wasn't that bad. It wasn't smooth by any means, but there wasn't as much headbanging, not a bunch of rattle, and while I didn't necessarily enjoy the rider layout, it was okay for most of it. It's still kind of not a good roller coaster, not one I necessarily enjoy, but it's not one I hate, and I might even ride it again in the future. So because so many hate this ride and I think it is not quite as bad as that, I will be deeming Corkscrew underrated. Not good, but it is underrated. Now for Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is actually in my top 25 roller coasters I've ever ridden. I think it's a really strong ride. It's perfectly smooth, surprisingly intense with elements such as the drop and some of the inversions. I found the airtime to be much stronger than most say. Every inversion is really good. It's a very fun ride with very strong pacing up until the end. And all in all, it's a really strong addition to the park lineup, actually my 5th favorite coaster in the lineup, and given that many I know do consider this just a coaster, and often put it around 9th or 10th in the park, deeming it forceless and having bad restraints, both of which I disagree with, I think Gatekeeper is the most underrated roller coaster at Cedar Point. On to Gemini. Gemini, in my personal opinion, is a very good ride. It's kind of an outlier in Cedar Point's lineup for me, as there's really no other ride that feels quite like it, where it's not necessarily the most forceful or intense ride with the best layout or anything like that. But the fun aspect is hard to beat. Being able to high-five the other car, I love that. And I think that really adds to the ride. So I think it's a very solid ride overall. And from what I hear around other opinions, most people would agree with that. Most say it's a solid ride, it's fun, It's not incredible by any means, but it has some solid airtime and intensity. and it's good overall, so I think my opinion mostly does align with those of many others, so this is going to be the first roller coaster I put in the middle. On to Iron Dragon. Iron Dragon is, in my opinion, the weakest of suspended coasters I've been on. It's not bad by any means, there's nothing wrong with it. I just find it to be much tamer and much more family-oriented than the others. I do like it, the terrain is strong, and the parts at the end are decently intense. However, I don't think it does a whole lot for somebody who looks for thrills in roller coasters. And I think most people generally agree with that. I don't know a ton of people who consider this up there with Vortex at Canada's Wonderland, or Ninja at Six Flags Magic Mountain. So this one I'm going to put in the middle. I think I generally agree with most. On to Magnum XL 200. The general opinion is interesting. I know some who really don't like this ride. Think it hurts, and only if you're sitting in the correct seat or push the lap bar all the way down is it even bearable to ride for some people. Where do I stand on this? Because on the other hand, some think it's an elite hyper and one of the best roller coasters in the park, top 3 I've even seen for some, because of the really good airtime you get. I'm pretty in the middle of these two opinions where I think it's a solid hyper, but it's not great for me. I can kind of see where both sides are coming from. I do enjoy the airtime at the end. The camelbacks are great. That said, I fear the dip on basically every hill because of the restraints. And I just don't think it's a great ride overall because some rides can be good, some rides are just not as good. And while I'll never say I hate this ride, the finest rides could make this pretty close to top 5 at Cedar Point, probably number 6, for me at least. But I just don't think it's quite as good as some of the highest opinions say, and the lowest opinions don't seem to consider it a bad ride. So overall, I'm going to say this ride is slightly overrated. I will get some hate for this, I'm sure, but it's still a good ride. It's just that some people who really love it, I'm not quite there with them, where I think it's not quite as enjoyable as the Magnum praisers think it is. On to Maverick. Maverick is tough because, for my personal opinion, it's one of the best launch coasters in the world. I like it more than Dragster personally for its complete layout, the tunnel launch is fantastic, and the elements are all very snappy and intense, and while sometimes the intensity on some elements doesn't quite work for me, where I think, while it does add adrenaline, sometimes they're not perfect, Maverick is very close to one of the best launch coasters. I only prefer one other, that is Velocicoaster, and I think the general public would kind of agree with this. I think most people would say Maverick is one of the best launch coasters. The only real thing that could possibly make this ride overrated is the fact that it's often seen as number 2 in the park, where I put it at number 3. But I think I generally hold it to the same esteem, so I will be putting Maverick in the middle. On to Millennium Force. This is one of my most interesting and controversial. Personally, this is my second favorite coaster in the park. My third favorite coaster ever. I really love this ride. I know it seems weird, but I just find the elements, their size and intensity to be really strong. The pacing is perfect. I like everything about the ride. And maybe I have a little sentimental value. It was one of my first major coasters, but I've never gotten a forceless ride on it. Maybe the fact that a lot of people in the community can call it Millennium Forceless is good for the ride, because I often go in expecting, okay, this is going to be the ride where I understand why people call it forceless, but it never comes. I've always loved this ride, I always get good rides on it. So, while there are many who do consider it an elite roller coaster, I know a lot more who think it's just a very good ride but not as great as others at the park. That is why I will be putting Millennium Force as an underrated roller coaster. On to Raptor, the B&M invert. Raptor is a good ride. I think, personally, a great one. I believe it is probably my third favorite of B&M inverts. I prefer Banshee and Montu. We're not going to talk about Banshee here, I'll get to that another time. But I really love Raptor. I find it to be very intense, well paced, most of the inversions are very good, and the helix at the end is deadly, in a good way. I like Raptor a lot, and I hear a lot of people say it's right around where I put it, though I also hear some people who say it's not a great ride, and it's one of the weaker B&M inverts. A lot of people I know kind of hold it in the same league as the Batman the Ride clones or Silver Bullet, and consider it just not the best of inverts. I think it's pretty close to the best, so while it is close for this one, I will not put Raptor in the middle, but underrated. On to Rougarou. What a tough one. My personal opinion? I like Rougarou. When I first rode it, I would have considered it one of the weakest rides of the park, and I was so mad that Mantis was taken down for that. But it's grown on me. I find the first half to be near flawless, not necessarily perfect, but there's nothing I hate about the first half. It's often smooth, very intense, and I like both of the inversions. However, once you get to that strange tilted loop, right into that you get headbanging, and from then on, it's not the most enjoyable ride. In my experiences, that's where it gets the name Rougarough or Rougharoo. So all in all, I think most people do consider it Rougharoo or Rougarough, but I also know quite a few who would say it's very good and underrated. So, due to the conflicting viewpoints, and me kind of leaning toward it being a pretty good ride, but not a great one, I'm going to put this one in the middle. On to Steel Vengeance. Steel Vengeance is such an anomaly. It's my favorite roller coaster. There is no way I could consider it overrated because I'm in the group of people who thinks it is the best roller coaster. Underrated? A possibility. I know a lot of people who say it's overrated. So many, in fact, that I kind of feel like maybe this is an underrated roller coaster. A lot of people seem to trash on it, saying it's a good ride, but not as good as people say. My big thing is that it's just a really fantastic Airtime packed RMC hybrid. I like every single thing about it. And the things I hear most people say are there are better coasters or it didn't live up to the hype. And given that they say it's overrated because of the hype, not necessarily the overall opinions of the roller coasters, I don't think Steel Vengeance is underrated. I'll put it in the middle, because a lot of people say it is the best in the world, and I am definitely in that league. So it's in between over and underrated. On to Top Thrill Dragster. I don't know anyone who doesn't like Top Thrill Dragster, and it's personally one of my favorite launch coasters. I think I may like it more than the average person. I think it's just below Maverick for that incredible launch. Some people think it's one of the absolute best coasters. Some think it is very high up there, but not necessarily one of the best. And as I'm kind of in between those two groups, I will put Dragster in the middle. On to our final coaster, Valravn. My personal opinion is this is a great ride. I think it's a little shy of my top 25, but it's pretty close. It's a really fun ride, with the main flaw for me being that mid-course brake run. And the really strange brake runs at the end honestly don't really matter as far as the ride goes, but this ride does get a little bit of flack. Some people don't love dive coasters, considering them forceless. I personally strongly disagree with that, thinking the drops and inversions are actually really strong. And even some of the airtime on Valravn is very good. I don't know a ton of people who think this is an amazing coaster. I know Airtime Thrills thinks very highly of it, and I think I'm kind of where he is in that way. I think it's a really strong ride, even if it's not the best dive coaster or B&M at Cedar Point. But all in all, I do think Valravn's underrated. A lot of people don't love it, and it's a fantastic ride for me. So it definitely gets in that underrated category. So, that is it. That is all the overrated and underrated. To kind of recap, I find that of the 14 roller coasters at Cedar Point, there was only one that I deemed overrated, and it was honestly kind of close. 6 of them were underrated. This is kind of weird given that Cedar Point's roller coaster collection is called the best in the world, and I consider 6 of the rides to not get as much credit as they should. And none of them are really overrated for me, but I guess it just speaks to how much I love the lineup. Every individual coaster works for me pretty much. I really love the lineup, and there's very few rides that I think get more credit than they should. And even with Magnum not being my favorite, it's a great ride, and does deserve a lot of respect. And the rides in the middle, they get lots of credit, and that's the credit they deserve. And that's all my thoughts. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video about overrated and underrated Cedar Point coasters. Comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.